Houston, we have a podcast. You're listening to the Premier Rockets podcast. It's H-Town Hoops, hosted by Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane.
All right, it is the H-Town Hoops podcast with Brandon Scott and Adam Spolane. Shout out to Austin Mendez on the other side, helping us out behind the scenes. Appreciate you, Austin. And it's been about a week since we got together, Adam. And for a team, I'll say this, man. For a team that is not winning a lot of games, I guess you could say in our little time span since we talked last, not really winning any games at all. And for a team that's not really playing really good basketball, it's been a little newsy over the last week or so. There have been some headlines and some speculation on just, I guess, the future of the team and its development. And so that's where I actually want to start off, because there's been a conversation over the last couple of days since you asked Eric Gordon after a game at Toyota Center if they had seen, or if he had seen, the improvement from the Rockets, from this young developing Rockets team that maybe he was expecting, or maybe that the team was hoping for. And his answer was quite simply that there hasn't been any improvement. And so I want to ask you, and as you know, being in this business, when we ask the questions, we don't get to pick the answers. But I'm going to turn it around now and ask you the question that you asked Eric Gordon. Was Eric Gordon right? Has there been improvement? And if so, where would you point it out?
No, I don't think he is right. And, this is a results, oriented business. And you're going to look at win-loss record. You're going to look at other numbers, and you're going to see that they are very similar to what they were last year. But I still think that you are seeing some individual improvement with a lot of these guys. And this is what development is. Development is just a long, arduous slog. It's not just boom, you wake up one day and all of a sudden you're an all-star. No, it doesn't work like that. It's incremental, it's daily, and you've got to stick with it. And there are going to be good days and there are going to be bad days. And a lot of times the bad days are going to outweigh the good days. And the bad days are the ones that really become more frustrating, just like Saturday against the Knicks was for Eric Gordon, where they turned the ball over 25 times. So no, I think, because you look, the turnovers were actually pretty good up until that. I mean, I know they were last in the league in turnover rate, but they had gone through a pretty decent stretch of not turning the basketball over. And then all of a sudden, the last three quarters of the Knicks, it went completely the other way. But then you look on Monday against Dallas, and they commit a season low 10 turnovers. So a lot of times, the way that you feel like the team is doing in terms of improvement, it's based on that one night. And I think that's what Gordon was frustrated with more than anything else, was just how poorly they played in that game against the Knicks.
Yeah, I think there's something to the ebb and flow of development, or the ebb and flow of improvement throughout a long season. Baseball and basketball are like this, where the seasons are so long, where you're going to go through stretches and you're going to go through periods of time where it seems like you're struggling more so than others, or where you are struggling more so than others. And I think that the timing of your question to him fit along with sort of what the narrative became after that, or what his answer was to that, was like, no, there's no improvement, because he was basing that off of, I think, the moment. And honestly, I would go somewhere in between. Like, I don't think he's right in saying that there is no improvement, but I would say that the improvement that we've seen has been somewhat incremental and probably not good enough, to the point of, what is the major difference between like no improvement and incremental improvement? And he's a guy who's not going to be on this team for much longer, I assume anyway, that by the time the trade deadline hits, he will have been traded. And he's got to be somebody that's frustrated, given the amount of time that he's been in the league and the amount of time that he's been on this team, the success that he's been a part of with this team, to be here now, especially for a third straight season, since everything sort of imploded with the James Harden era. It's got to be getting to him at some point. It's got to be frustrating. But the Rockets have not, I'm not going to say that they haven't shown it, because I would agree with you. They have shown improvement, but they've been pretty bad lately. I mean, over their last 10 games, they have the worst net rating in basketball. Now, that shouldn't be super surprising. I don't think that they would go a stretch where they'd have the worst net rating in basketball, given that they're one of the younger and not as good teams in the league, but they're 27th for the season, same record as this time last year. It just seems like the improvement that they wanted to see or that they were expecting to see hasn't quite materialized in the way that they wanted to see it just yet.
I think you look at it this way. They started the year 2-12, and then they went 8-12, I think their next 20 games after that. And now you're going through this stretch also. So I think early in the year it was rough. Schedule was really, really rough. A lot of road games, a lot of good teams on the schedule. Things got better during that middle 20 games, and now they're going through another rough patch. That's going to happen. And here's a question I'll ask you, because we were talking about this before the game yesterday. Are the Rockets better today than they were this time last year?
Yes.
You think? See, now here's the position that I'll take on that. The Rockets are a lot younger now than they were this time last year, because Jayshawn Tate has basically not played the entire season, and then Christian Wood isn't around. And so, to me, and Gordon hasn't been as good. So that's the other thing, is that Gordon's played at a lower level. You take Wood off the roster, and you take Tate basically out of the equation for everything except for 3 games. So I think you can make an argument that they are a worse basketball team just because they are so much younger and they are relying on younger players than they were at this time last year. So I don't think that it should be surprising that they're going through a stretch like this just because of how young this group actually is. And so I don't think that anybody can be surprised. I still think they're on pace to win, 24, 25 games, something like that. I think that if you would have asked them before the season, they would say, yeah, we're probably a 24, 25 win team. Maybe people outside the organization would have thought differently because you just assume you're going to get linear development from all these guys. And you saw how they developed from day 1 last year to day 82 last year. And you just figure, well, they'll just pick up from there and they'll make that same sort of leap. And it doesn't really work that way. So you're seeing growing pains. You are seeing guys who maybe haven't taken the step that maybe you thought. We're going to talk about Jalen Green here in a few minutes. I don't think that he has played better over the course of the season. I think that it feels like there are times where he's taken step backs, but I do think that you look at Kevin Porter Jr. and he's having a nice stretch where he's playing a really good basketball. That's going to happen. They're not shooting the ball well at all. They are a lousy 3-point shooting team. They actually aren't taking as many threes as you would have thought. And Jabari Smith is a guy who takes a lot of threes, and he's not making them right now. So to me, this is kind of what I would have expected coming into the year. I know when you actually see it come into fruition, doesn't look great. It looks really bad at times, but none of this is really surprising to me.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I view them as a better team now than last year is because of those players that have been added that hopefully are developed at some point, or the ones that they hope develop into something. You just mentioned Jabari Smith as somebody who, I guess in my mind, when you ask that question, that's someone who I project to eventually be a much better player than Christian Wood. But when I think about it, and it doesn't take much thought to come to this conclusion, he's not a better player than him right now today. So that part of it is fair. So I think that, to re-answer your question, I think that they are in better position. They have repositioned themselves to be a better team eventually based off of the talent that they've accumulated since a year ago. But yeah, you're probably right. The minus Christian Wood, minus Jayshawn Tate. I know John Wall didn't play a single minute for him last year, but he was at least on the team. They don't have, I mean,
About a month and a half.
yeah. So I mean, yeah, they are. But I mean, what are we comparing here anyway? You know, 2 teams that just, quite frankly, whether it be last year or this year, have not been very good, or was not very good, and continues to not be very good. And to that point, I want to ask you about the head coach, Stephen Silas. We've had a number of discussions about Silas on this podcast since we started doing it. Some of it positive, some of it negative, a lot of it negative, I would say, but I would say much more negative in the Rockets Twitter and internet streets. But the reality of it, at least from my vantage point, is that this does seem to be a team that plays with a lack of discipline and a lack of focus, either when I'm there or when I'm just watching you guys from your post-game press conference or any press conferences that you guys do with the Rockets. It feels like focus, and maybe discipline is not the exact word, but it feels like that's what we're getting at a lot of times. Focus and discipline is far too frequently lacking. And I understand that it's a young team And that's something that perhaps you could expect or should expect with a young team, to sort of have these lapses in focus and to maybe not be the most disciplined team out there. Maybe that's even part of the frustration for Eric Gordon that we were just talking about moments ago. But yeah, I mean, I feel like that is at the heart of the lack of improvement or stagnation, however you want to characterize what the Rockets are right now. And so, to that point, how much longer? Well, first of all, I would say how much of this would you put on Silas? And given that, how much longer would you expect Stephen Silas to be able to keep this job?
So I definitely think some of it falls on the head coach. But also, the same thing can be said. A lot of it falls on the players. And then a lot of it falls on the people who built the roster. So I think there's plenty of blame to pass around when you have a team that is, what are they now, 10 and 27, something like that. I might be a little off on that. The record obviously isn't very good, but there's a lot of blame to go around, is I guess is the point. And they're losing a lot of games. I mean, are they are in position to win some of these games. Some of these games they are not in position to win. It feels like at times they are prepared. It feels like at times they are not prepared to play. So I personally, I don't know. I think it's really hard for me to judge how much of it is on the shoulders of this guy, how much blame falls on the shoulders of that guy, just because you're not there. And so I don't. For me, it's really hard to make that sort of a judgment. Now, how much longer does he keep his job? I have no feel for that. It feels like at some point it's going to end just because he doesn't have a contract for next year, and someone's going to be the fall guy. And they like, and I've said this before, they knew what the season was going to be. They knew they were going to be bad. They knew they were going to lose a lot of games. But to me, at some point, somebody's probably going to have to take a hit. And Silas, again, is the guy who does not have a contract for next season. So it's kind of easy. I mean, that's the easy decision. You can't fire the players. The GM has job security. The head coach does not. Therefore, it's usually the head coach that takes the hit. But here's the question that I have. If they fire Silas tomorrow, does that change anything? How much actually gets changed by firing the head coach? Because to me, same players, same front office. It's just a different guy calling the timeouts. So how much actually does change? Because also, whoever takes over, you're looking at what, 69-year-old John Lucas or 69-year-old Lionel Hollins. So what environment is going to be better to develop these players? Is it going to be Silas or would it be Lucas or Hollins? I can't answer that question.
Yeah, well, I think that the change, I don't know if there is I can't say for sure that there would be a tangible change that would like make a difference, that would make anyone happy per se. But
It would make the fans feel happy for like 3 or 4 days, and then nothing would change, and then
yeah,
they would be back to let's just fire Lucas or fire Hollins or whoever else.
yeah, I definitely don't feel like you need to make an in-season coaching change to make the fans happy. So hopefully they don't even consider that, and I'm pretty sure that they wouldn't. But I do feel like what it would accomplish or what it might aim to accomplish is to hold someone accountable if they feel like, okay, if management feels like the lack of improvement or minimal improvement, minimal steps that have been taken, somebody needs to be held accountable for that. And you made a good you had a good word for it, calling it the fall guy. Yeah, somebody has to answer for what you see. I think in any sport, you go long enough being this bad that eventually it becomes hard to justify anyone's position or perhaps everyone's position on the team. And like you said, can't fire the players. The GM has job security, but the way that they're playing right now, and even like, and again, we'll talk about Jalen Green pretty soon, but like the way that a lot of what we're seeing is playing out right now, I feel like you can justify demoting or getting rid of anyone, at that point. Obviously, you wouldn't get rid of your franchise players that you just drafted and all of that, but sitting them in certain moments, we've talked about that in previous podcasts where they didn't give you the proper maximum effort that you were looking for, that you would expect from a player of that caliber, and nothing happened. Like at some point, accountability has to stand for something and amount to something. And I'm not really sure how they do that. Now, again, firing Silas and promoting a 69-year-old Hollins or Lucas doesn't really do anything for you in the long term. And I'm not sure like the development of these young players, like there's a benefit there to the development of the young players, but I do feel like at the very least it shows them all what accountability looks like. Like they all know that, their situation is not Silas's, but to just kind of see in real time in the NBA what it looks like when you don't get it done, that you can get your coach fired, that you can derail whatever good vibes of the season that you were having, so I think that maybe that's what it would be. And, maybe it's also an element of ripping the band-aid off before, but ripping the band-aid off for something that seems like it's going to be inevitable anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. Is that making the wrong guy the fall guy though? So it's
Yeah.
just like, hey, you guys have been terrible, so this guy's going to take the hit for it. I mean, what I don't know if that sends the right kind of message that you want to send. But to me, the only thing that should matter is who helps us develop our players better. Is it with Silas as the head coach? Because if it is, then you just leave him in that job the rest of the year. If it's somebody else, okay, then you make a move. But to me, I don't know if making John Lucas the head coach is going to help develop the players because, frankly, player development is kind of his thing. Now you make him the head coach, and now his attention is taken off of that. And I mean, at what point do players just start to tune Lucas out? Because let's be honest, Lucas is a yeller, and you can only yell so much. I mean, I posted the video. They did some 4-on-4 today after practice, and Lucas is just yelling the entire time. And at what point do professional basketball players, I don't care how old they are, how young they are, they're going to get tired of that. And so I don't know if that necessarily works as a head coach. I don't know if Lionel Hollins has any interest in wanting to be a head coach again. He's almost 70 years old, and I don't know if he wants to be the head coach of a team that's just going to lose a bunch of games. And so I don't know if that's the best environment for everybody. So you're in a weird spot. It feels like a change is probably inevitable. I don't know when that change would be made. Again, doesn't have a contract for next year. And the fact that they did not pick up the option, that they have not picked up the option at this point, kind of tells you all you need to know about what Silas's future stands at this point. But I just don't know if making a move in season makes a whole lot of sense or changes anything and makes the situation any better.
Yeah, I don't know if it changes a lot of things or makes the situation any better. I could see it making sense again from a standpoint of, and when I talked about accountability, not just holding the players accountable, but in some ways, even maybe this is what's happening by them not renewing this or not picking up the option and not, extending them and all these other options that they would have had if they believed in Silas long term. But also holding accountable the first topic that we had, the improvement. I know you said that you didn't necessarily agree with Eric Gordon's assertion that there has been no improvement, but I do feel like there has not been enough improvement, and that in and of itself is probably why we are where we are with Silas and him not, getting a new contract. And that would be the thing that would make the most sense to me if they were to make a move. But to your point, though, certainly can make a good argument, and I think you have, for it being like, you know, sort of like a distinction without a difference. Like it's still going to be the same old, more than likely the same old story, the same old show that you've been seeing. And I would actually be concerned. I like your point about Lucas. I would be concerned about Lucas or Hollins, maybe in a more old school, tougher type. How would that weigh on this younger group? That, like, I'm not trying to say that they're fragile or anything, but to go from I mean, that's quite the tempo and quite the switch, I would say, to go from sort of the even keeled Silas to the, John Lucas, who maybe that's fine if he's substituting for a day or two, but if he's going to be yelling like that for the remainder of the season, and that's the type of energy that you're getting, I could see how that might wear on some younger players. So I guess they'd have to think about all of that. And again, I made the point of just ripping the band-aid off. Maybe there's no need to do that, given that it's a team headed nowhere. Okay. So it's not a team that, like, hey, we got to do this so we salvage the rest of the season. You're not doing that. So there's a case against it right there of just like, to what, and I think this is what you were saying, like to what end, to what are you ultimately accomplishing other than making a statement and sort of just showing some type of outward accountability as opposed to like really making an impact on the team. So
Yeah, for sure.
yeah. So let's talk about the shooting because you mentioned that earlier as well. One of the worst 3-point shooting teams in basketball, if not the worst, but I know they're close to it. Pretty bad, pretty damn bad. And they cannot score at the end of games. Like they can't execute an offense at the end. And that might be one of the more frustrating things about watching them is how they can be in a game or even in the games where they are competitive for a stretch. It feels like at the end, the offense just sort of collapses. I saw this, I think it was Jonathan Fagan who mentioned it in an article, but and I looked this up. They have the league's top rated defense in clutch situations, but they rank last offensively in games with a margin of 5 points or less in the final 5 minutes. So, like, what is with that? Why do you think that is? Is it just because they can't shoot?
That's part of it. It's also that teams lock down in the last 5 minutes of a close game, and they just aren't good enough at getting the shots that they want. And I do think that they're a team that's again they're a very young team, and so it's about execution in crunch time, and they just don't know how to execute at this point. I think it's really that simple, where teams are going to pick up their level on that end, on the defensive end of the floor, and if you don't execute your stuff then it's going to be really hard to score. And they don't have the shooting to make up for a lack of execution. And I do think one of the things that does hurt is that they'll take Alperen Şengün off the floor for defensive purposes. And you just said they are a terrific defensive team in the last 5 minutes of the game. Part of that is having Usman Garuba on the floor during those stretches. But at the same time, you weaken your offense when you do it that way. So I think that's one of the tough aspects, and that's the trade-off that you have to make. So I do the shooting. Obviously, it has not been good. They have opportunities. I do think that they're a young team. I do think that they can sometimes get a little tired at the end of games. I think that Jabari Smith mentioned that last night because he had a really clean look from three, pull up three that he had an opportunity to, I believe, tie the game in the final minute of last night's game, and he missed it. And I think that part of that could have just been the minutes low that he had to play, having to spend all that time defending Luka Doncic, and you're gonna get tired during that stretch, and that's gonna make the shots a little tougher to fall.
What about Jalen Green? Jalen Green, and I was looking this up before we started the show. In the last 18 games, Jalen Green has made 10 shots or more just twice. That was the Milwaukee game at home, when they beat the Bucks at home, one of their better games of the season, probably one of their top 3 or 4 or 5 games of the season. And the road loss to Boston. And even then, he was only 3 of 11 from 3. Now, obviously, he had a good shooting. I want to say he was 50% from the field. So obviously, he did a good job of making his twos. But what would you say about the shooting struggles? We've talked about this in previous episodes as well. Of how I made the note of how his form and his mechanics on his shot have seemed to have relegated back to what it was his rookie year when John Lucas was working with him on that, trying to get his shot a little higher, or at least his release point a little bit higher. He needed to get stronger back then. It feels like he has gotten stronger, but the shot is just inconsistent and erratic. And I felt like there was a point where, and I still feel like this for the most part, where it does feel like he's taking better shots. He's more decisive in picking his spots, and just overall as an offensive player, he looks better out there, but the numbers are just not pretty. And it feels like it's either a constant struggle or just a level of inconsistency there. What are you seeing from him?
They're actually not that far off from last year. Last year he shot 42.6% from the field. This year he's 41.4. So that's 1.2 percentage points off. 3-point shooting, 34% to 32.7%. Again, not that far off. So I don't know exactly what it is. I'm not a shot doctor. I do know that he talked maybe a week or two ago that he thought his shot had gotten flat, and that was something that he had been working on with John Lucas in the gym, really basically every single morning, and they were in the gym, early for a lot of last season. But it's just been, I think, hard sometimes to work on this stuff because of just the way the schedule has been, where they've had very little practice time. Like we're doing this on Tuesday, January 3rd. They practiced for the first time in over a week, I want to say, today. So there just hasn't been a lot of practice time. You have some gym time here and there, but you want to save the good stuff for the actual game. So just haven't had a lot of time to really work on stuff. The shooting stuff doesn't necessarily concern me. You bring up field goal makes, some of that is he's getting to the free throw line a lot more. So you're not making shots a lot of times when you're getting to the free throw line. And he is taking more free throws this year than he did last year. I mean, he's almost doubled his free throw attempts. He was 3.5 last year. He's 6 this year. So I think that's big on the positive side of things. I feel like the 3-point stroke will come back. And I think that's the big thing for him right now is just get that shot back working again and get the confidence back. Cause I do think that he's lost a little bit of confidence in that shot right now. So I don't think any of it's a real big concern. I think the stuff that has worried me more about Jalen Green over this stretch is just defensively. And then just, some of his on-court habits where he's not getting back defensively. We didn't talk about the Dallas game from Thursday, but, giving up 25 fast break points against a team that averages the fewest amount of fast break points in the entire NBA. A lot of that's on Jalen Green. And so he's got to do a better job of getting back. There was one clip I saw that somebody posted of him basically giving up on a play 3 different times. I mean, that's the sort of stuff that would have me a little bit more worried than some of the shooting stuff, which can be a high variance stat.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would be worried about all of it. I mean, because for one thing, the shooting stuff would worry me or worries me for now, and not long term, but just in the moment. Because if there's anything he should be doing well, or like what his calling card is scoring. Like he's a guy who we've talked about ever since he was, going into the draft as someone who could potentially lead the league in score. He could be a scoring champion at some point in this league. Like he's got that in him. You can see that talent is there. So I would be worried about that, at least in the short term, that it's not quite looking like, like I mean, he looks like the athlete and sort of like he's got the makeup overall of the profile of somebody that should be that eventually. But I mean, if there's anything that you would expect him to do well, it would be to score the basketball, and you would expect him to be a more efficient scorer. But to this point that you made, I think is a good one, and I would say is worth being even more concerned about. It's like he's not really playing hard all the time, or he's not really giving maximum effort all the time. And I know it's a long season and you're not going to have guys giving maximum effort all the time, but I mean, you can't have videos out like the one that you're talking about. And I saw it too, where he quits on a play defensively seemingly 3 different times. You're talking about how he doesn't get back on defense a lot, transition defense. Like that would you say that it is concerning when your star player, for at least for now, the best player on your team and the guy who projects to be, I would say, the best player on your team of the future, whenever you do get good again, that's somebody that right now, or at least in the very beginning, you've got some effort concerns about? Like, does it feel like he doesn't play hard sometimes?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly does, and I don't think that makes him any different than any other player, to be honest with you. I think that happens over the course of a really long season. But when you're struggling to make shots, then you got to make up for it in other ways. And playing hard is one way where you can make up for it. It just makes life a whole lot easier on your teammates when you do that. So, you can compensate when you're not making shots. And I don't think he's doing that right now. I'm not, again, the shooting stuff doesn't necessarily bother me. I still think that he's putting himself in position to score the basketball. He's getting to the rim. He's getting to the foul line. He's just not making jump shots, which happens sometimes. So that stuff isn't concerning. It's more the on-court habits, the body language. That's the stuff that would have me pause with him right now.
All right. So in an earlier podcast, can't remember if it was the last episode or the one before that, but I asked you the question and we had the discussion of, should it even matter? Should it even matter that Kevin Porter Jr. does not play or look like, through his play, does not look like a traditional point guard? year 2 of being a full-time point guard, it's not exactly looking like, necessarily smooth per se. And I've said for a while that, I thought, you know, Kevin Porter Jr. to me was being misused as a point guard. I thought he was a wing player all along. Get somebody else to play point guard and let Kevin Porter Jr. get buckets. Now, the way the team is currently constructed, and after these last couple of drafts with Jalen Green there, that's probably the guy that should be in that role that I was sort of envisioning for Kevin Porter Jr. when he first got here. Now, I want to ask you, are you sold on Kevin Porter Jr. as point guard? I asked the question before whether it matters. I guess it does matter since that's where they're playing him. That's how they're playing him. And I did see the report. I don't even know if it was a report. It was actually just mentioned on Zach Lowe's podcast by Tim McMahon, who covers the NBA and is obviously based here in Texas, mentioning that he doesn't feel like he doesn't believe the organization is 100% sold on Kevin Porter Jr. as a point guard or as as a starting NBA point guard or however it was worded. Where are you with that? Do you buy that? And is there any reason to be concerned about how they are utilizing Kevin Porter Jr. right now?
I think what McMahon said was the only people who believe in him as a starting point guard is the Rockets front office. I
Okay,
mean,
so the opposite.
that's
So
the way
the
they
opposite.
worded it. Yeah. Do I think that he's a point guard? I think he can play point guard. Do I think he should be the primary ball handler on a high level team? The answer is probably not. It reminds you a lot. Remember when Victor Oladipo first came into the league with Orlando and they tried to make him a point guard and it just didn't work.
Yeah.
I do think that Kevin Porter Jr. is a guy who can handle that, and I do think that he's a little inconsistent. And some of that is effort, some of that is focus, some of that is turnovers. But the turnovers, he's averaging more turnovers this year than he did last year, which is a problem. But he's brought that down over the last 10 or so games, I think. So that's a step. Actually, it's the last 1 to 7 games. He's brought that down. He's gotten that number to below 3 over the last 7 games. Again, it's not great, but it's a step. It's a step in the right direction. And remember, last year he started out the year really bad in that department, and then he improved as the year went along. So do I think that? And I think we talked about this the last time. I don't know if it's necessarily should he be. I don't think is he a point guard is the right discussion. It's more of should he be the guy who leads your team in touches. And I don't think he is. I don't think he's that type of a guy. I do think that he's a guy who can certainly play and be a rotation player on a really good team. I think that there are some teams where he could be a starter. But I do think that they probably don't have him in his right role, at least right now. And again, he's getting better and he's learning. And the fact that you are seeing, I think he's the one guy that you can say that you've seen some growth from him, but he does a lot of things well off the ball. He's probably their best. I think he was the third best in the NBA last year in catch and shoot threes. So giving him an opportunity to put him in a position for those, I think is positive. He is a good passer. He's a very good passer. I think that's a big reason why the Rockets thought that he could play that position. And I remember Rafael Stone saying that he called him an elite passer. Not long after they got him. So he's got really good size for that position. He can defend, he's not a great defender, but he at least tries hard and he can be physical. I mean, you saw, last night they're starting him out on Luka Doncic. I mean, they feel confident enough in him to be able to, handle that physically. So I do think that there are signs that he can do it, but I don't think that having him as your lead ball handler is the best utilization of him.
Yeah, but and then to me it feels like and you tell me what you think is more of a conflict, like having him as your lead ball handler or like I don't know if it's too much of a demotion to say, "Hey, go from being our lead ball handler to being our second off ball option," or cuz Jalen Green's they're not going to make him a point guard. So then it's like he goes from not just from the 1 to the 3 position wise. I know it's a kind of a positionless game now, but he goes from like primary ball handler and leading the team in touches to kind of taking a back seat on the wing from what essentially amounts to the future of the franchise and Jalen Green. So like I don't know how much that's even a thought, but I know I think about it like, okay, now that they've done the point guard thing, for an entire season, at the end of his first season here, and I guess now going on almost 2 full seasons, it will be after this year. Like, how do you go back? How do you go backward? How do you demote a guy who you've elevated to? I know the team's not very good, but elevated at this level within this context. I don't know if that's toothpaste you can put back in the tube, or if you can put that genie back in the bottle, so to speak.
Well, I mean, the thing is, right now they got to have somebody better, and they don't have anybody. They don't have anyone better on the roster who can be a primary ball handler at this point. And I think maybe Jalen Green could carry that load at some point. I don't think he's ready for it now. I think that you've kind of seen that he's not quite there. Doesn't quite have the confidence just in the handle at this point in the playmaking ability. But we'll see if maybe he gets to that level. Who knows? They might sign a guy with the beard who can play point guard, and then maybe that shifts guys to other spots. So I do think there are options. We'll see what happens in the draft. Maybe if you wind up with Scoot Henderson and maybe he's running point for you. Maybe there's somebody else in free agency. Right now, he's got to be the point guard because there's nobody else who can play the position. We can cross this bridge in 4 or 5 months and see if maybe they're able to add somebody to the fold who might be better suited for that. But until that point, you got to live with it. You got to see maybe he gets better. Maybe you see it over this last half of the season where he really grows into the role and shows you that he can do this at a high level, and he can do it consistently at a high level. So they're certainly giving him every opportunity to get there. I just don't know if it'll ever happen.
Yeah, they draft Scoot Henderson, and that answers the question at point guard, I should say. That sort of just fixes that. And knock on wood, they end up with Victor Wembanyama. I'm not sure if it matters at all who's the point guard. Somebody just need to get that ball across the court, or just get it to where he wants it and get it to that guy, because he is an anomaly. He is unlike anything that I've ever seen. So perhaps better days are ahead for the Rockets either way, whether they get, and it's no guarantee that they get either of those guys, but if they get either one of them, I feel like that fixes a lot of the problems. That fixes a lot of the problems that we're discussing and that we will be discussing throughout the rest of the season on this podcast, on the H-Town Hoops podcast, covering the Rockets. Now, in future episodes, possibly later on this week, we'll talk about it offline, but in future episodes, as we've talked about before, we're going to do some deep dives into the rookies and do some synopsis of just where we are at this point of the season, kind of just do a diagnosis of where the Rockets are. So certainly looking forward to that. As you see there, and you guys might hear this by the time some of these games are played, but the rest of the week, you've got the Pelicans on Wednesday. Zion Williamson was just ruled out. It looks like he's going to be out for a little while, certainly out Wednesday against the Rockets, but he might be out for a significant stretch with, I believe it was a hamstring strain is what I saw.
Yes.
Some type of hamstring injury. And then, so this is going to be a back-to-back. Pelicans on Wednesday, the hated Utah Jazz on Thursday. So look forward to that. And, we'll be getting further into diagnosing exactly where this Rockets team is, development, non-development, improvement, non-improvement, incremental improvement, however and whatever the case may be. So looking forward to that. Appreciate Austin Mendez on the other side, doing everything behind the scenes, producing this bad boy. And for Adam Spolane, Brandon Scott, this has been the H-Town Hoops podcast. Make sure you like, rate, review, subscribe. Anything that you're prompted to do positively about the podcast, we implore you to do, and tell your people about it, and make sure we can grow that audience. And until next time, y'all be good.